Please welcome back Andrew Ross Sorkin and his guest, the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Mr. Vice President,
thank you, Andrew,
for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.
It is great to see you, and it is great to have you on the stage, because what I want to do over the next time we have together is talk about, frankly, the future of the Republican Party, the future of the country, the future of the relationship between the GOP and the world of business, which seems to be shifting, and your own experience, of course, as it includes January 6th as well, if we could, which you've written so much about, I should say, in a book called So Help Me God, which he has recently published. Here's where I want to start the conversation. I want to say two words: policy and character. And the reason I'm talking about the two words policy and character is you've talked a lot about how proud you are of the policies that you enacted as vice president.
I am.
But I think you also have questions about character, including President Trump's character. And I want you to talk, if you could, about how you think about those two things, even when they may be at odds, and also what you think has just happened in the context of the midterms, which is to say, do we believe that the country chose character over policy?
Well, Andrew, first, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations on bringing the DealBook Summit back together, everybody in the same place. And I know it's been a very special day. I'm honored to be here. You're right. In my book, So Help Me God, I write with great pride about the accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration. It obviously didn't end well, but what we were able to do to rebuild our military, secure our border, revive the economy through tax cuts, rolling back regulations, unleashing American energy, and conservatives to our courts at every level is a record I'll be proud of the rest of my life. With regard to character, though, I'm someone that I like that verse in the Bible that says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." I actually don't spend a lot of time trying to make pronouncements on anyone's character, but I think those decisions are ultimately in the hands of the American people. They have been in the past, they will be in the future. With this past election, I see a common denominator among Republican candidates, those that succeeded and those that fell short. And one is simply that our candidates have focused on the future, focused on the challenges the American people are facing today with record inflation, rising energy prices, a crisis at our border. Focused on solutions for the future. We're successful in states across the country, congressional districts across the country. But candidates that were focused on the past, focused on particularly relitigating the last election, were less successful. So my takeaway for 2022 and going forward is what I said when I rallied for Governor Brian Kemp the night before his primary, that he won by 50 points, largely divided on that very issue. I said the Republican Party needs to be the party of the future. If we articulate a vision for the future for the American people, built on time-honored, common-sense American ideals and principles, we'll not just win the next election,
where does character come in? Because you're a religious man, you talk about morality. Where does character come into this conversation?
Well, I think at many levels it does. One of the things I was very proud of was being a part of an administration that actually did what we said we would do, rebuilding the military. I recount a story about on the very first day of the administration, the president actually pushed back on an executive order freezing spending at the Pentagon because we had committed to increasing spending at the Pentagon. Of course, we passed the largest increase in defense spending since the days of Ronald Reagan. We went forward and cut taxes and cut regulations and unleashed energy, appointed conservatives to our courts at every level. And I think at its very essence, what the American people most want from elected officials is that you actually will do what you said you would do. I don't always like that when Democrats are elected and they do what they said they would do. I mean, But it is the nature of our system and the nature of our democracy.
Sure, but there's also the issue of truth, and this goes to the issue of morality, and that's why I said you're a religious man. And I wanted to talk about that because January 6th was a microcosm of all things bad about character. And at some point, you must have realized that there was a terrible, terrible problem. I'm curious when you think you realized it and why you think you didn't realize it earlier.
Well, January 6th was a tragic day, but I'll always believe, because of the courage of law enforcement, who quelled the riot that took place at the Capitol, that Republicans and Democrats were able to reconvene on the very same day, and I'll always believe that we did our duty under the Constitution of the United States and the laws of this country. Now, when I apprehended what was happening, I can tell you, was quite late in the process, as I recount in my book. You know, the president and I had developed a very close working relationship over 4.5 years. I spent almost every day, several hours in the Oval Office with the president when we were in Washington, D.C. together. I had my differences with the president, but I thought as vice president, I should always keep those between the two of us. Walter Mondale said, as I quote in my book, the vice president knows his opinion to the president once and in private, and I think he was right. I was always loyal to President Donald Trump. The only higher loyalty I had was to God and the Constitution, the oath of office.
But you're no longer loyal to him.
Say again.
I said you're no longer loyal to him, or you are.
Well, I'm very proud of the record, Andrew. I want to be very clear on that.
But you're not loyal to the character then.
Well, it's not like that's the first time you brought that up.
Let me ask you a different question.
Look, I want to be really clear on this point, and people can read about it, and so help me God. From shortly after the election, I had concerns about the fact that 6 states around the country had changed the rules in their elections without legislative action. But I never saw, all the way through January 6th, evidence of widespread fraud in any state that would change the outcome. But for my part, I wanted to remain open to the possibility that evidence would come forward. I supported the legal challenges. I supported the right of members of Congress to bring objections, as Democrats had done in the last 3 elections where Republicans had prevailed, to bring objections on the floor of the Congress and have a debate over the evidence and the irregularities. But it would be just up until 2 days before January 6th, and I had been consistently telling the president for weeks what my role was under the Constitution and what my view was of the state of affairs. In fact, we had lost the election, that the legal challenges had not played out, that the process in the Congress could go forward, have a thorough debate, but the change of the outcome was unlikely. But even on that Monday, January 4th, I remember watching the president at a rally in Georgia. And Andrew, he actually said, he opened his remarks by saying, our great vice president's going to have to come through for us on Wednesday. And then he said, if he doesn't, I probably won't like him as much. But then he caught himself. And he said, no. He said, one thing you know about Mike is he always plays it straight. And I remember watching the television that night and thinking that he might just be coming around to recognize what my role was under the Constitution, that no vice president had ever asserted the authority to accept or reject votes, and I made it clear to him that I was going to do my duty that day, to open and count the votes and certify the election that we had lost. But ultimately, the president was surrounded by a gaggle of outside lawyers that were telling him what his itching ears wanted to hear, and the tragedy that ensued.
Let me ask you a different question. Recently on PBS, Bill Barr said, I personally think that they probably have the basis for legitimately indicting Trump. If they did, what do you think would happen? And do you, as somebody who's talked about the rule of law repeatedly, but also more recently talked about the politics of this, I think, how do you balance those two things?
Well, no one is above the law. But I hope, after years of politicization at the Justice Department, that the new independent counsel would think very carefully about next steps. I mean, our politics is probably more divided now than any time in our country. And after years where we saw 2.5 years of an independent counsel investigation that was based on what the FBI knew was opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign. FBI agents had falsified documents to obtain warrants. And after this summer, where we saw the FBI execute a search warrant against the personal residence of a former president, when there were preliminary steps they could have taken to obtain the documents prior to that.
But I think he repeatedly, I mean, just in fairness, he repeatedly...
My hope is the Justice Department would think very carefully, Andrew, because I think any action against a former president of the United States would be very divisive to the country. I'm not sure that taking bad advice from lawyers is a violation of criminal law. But the other piece of it is, I think it would send the wrong message to the world. We see too many cases in third world countries where the incoming administration prosecutes the prior administration, and that's not an image that I'd like resonating around the world from the United States of America.
Can you help explain this for us? We were talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu actually about this, about President Trump's recent meeting with Kanye West. And I know you condemned that meeting, but since you spent as much time with the president as you have, can you explain it to us? Meaning, if you don't believe he's anti-Semitic, and you look at, his son-in-law and all of that, can you explain how he seems to associate and elevate white nationalists and those who have been anti-Semitic, and it's not just a one-time thing? What do you think that's about? What is it about his judgment?
Well, I can't explain it. I wasn't there. But President Trump was wrong to give a white nationalist, a Holocaust denier, a seat at the table. No president, no former president, no one aspiring to be president should give any quarter to people that hold those views. And but I must tell you, as I wrote in the book, I don't believe Donald Trump is an anti-Semite. I don't believe he's a bigot or a racist. I never would have been his vice president if I believed it.
But then why does he relate to them in the way that he does?
Well, look, and thank you for mentioning his family members. People that routinely in the national media refer to the president as anti-Semitic forget that his daughter is Jewish, son-in-law is Jewish, he has Jewish grandchildren, and frankly, he led the most pro-Israel administration in American history. But I can't account for what I cannot account for. I don't know how that dinner came about, but as I said, it was wrong that it happened. I think associating with people with anti-Semitic views, or people at a high national office, is ill-advised. I thought those actions this past week were wrong. I thought President Obama associating with Louis Farrakhan was wrong. And I think Republicans and Democrats ought to be united in rejecting anti-Semitism in all of its forms in every country in the West.
Let me ask you another question about politics, though. You talked about potentially indicting the president and what that would mean to the country. You're very proud of your record of the justices that are now on the Supreme Court. I'm curious what you think that does to the democracy. And the reason I ask is because you now have a court that for generations, it would arguably appear, will be of one political persuasion over another, and may very well not be in the majority, and what that actually means for governing.
Well, as you can tell, if I haven't mentioned, I have a book.
Yeah, we got that. We're good.
I have a lifelong love for the Constitution of the United States. And all of my 20 years of public service, I sought to keep faith with the oath that I took to support and uphold it. It's an oath I made to all of you, the American people, and it's an oath I made to Almighty God. Hence the title of the book. I believe in our form of government. I believe that elections have consequences, but I think I have more confidence in the new majority on the Supreme Court than is implied in your question. I truly do believe...
What's only implied is that it's now political.
I don't believe Justice Neil Gorsuch, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, proudly from the state of Indiana, will be sitting on the bench as Republicans. I think they will be sitting on the bench as people with a particular judicial philosophy, and I think they'll call balls and strikes in the way that my view is the Supreme Court should have always done. What's implied in your question, Andrew, with great respect, because you know how much I respect you, and I do, we've thought too much about the Supreme Court of the United States as a place to go get political outcomes. And I, for one, welcome the Dobbs decision, returning the question of abortion to the states and the American people where it belongs, where questions most dear to the life of the nation can be hashed out in the democratic process, and we can leave the judiciary to do that, which the judiciary was designed to do.
Let me ask you a related question, and maybe even touches on Citizens United, which is to say that we've heard from businesses on this issue, on this decision, on what they're going to be doing as it relates to supporting employees and the like, and also lobbying in certain cases for various laws. Are you for or against businesses getting involved in these issues? Because on one side, there's the view that corporations are people and that they should be able to lobby for these things. That's been a position of the GOP. And on the other side, there's been this position that actually on social issues, they should not touch it. What do you think?
Well, Andrew, I think I wrote one of the early pieces in the spring of this past year.
You wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal.
On the ESG movement.
Yes, you did.
And I'm pleased to see states around the country and Congress beginning to focus attention on the issue. Look, corporations and their boards can make the decisions they choose to make, but they ought not to be able to use the proxy of shareholders, millions of shareholders around the country, to advance a political agenda that may or may not be consistent with what those shareholders believe. I mean, the advent of ESG as a political force advancing an environmental, social, governance agenda on the corporate level, I think it literally betrays the trust of tens of millions of shareholders who invest in that corporation in the hopes that the board will work to maximize returns under the law. And yet what's becoming increasingly clear is many corporations have been using those shareholder proxy votes and resources to advance a political agenda.
What do you think?
I just think it all needs to be transparent. If you want to invest in a corporation that is active in politics, I'll fight to the death for your right to do that. But having Americans investing and not knowing that corporations are using it to advance an agenda that may be at odds with their values.
What about the idea of political retribution against those companies? So what did you think of the decision by DeSantis to change the tax policy around Disney explicitly as retribution against their views on that bill?
Well, I think Bob Iger's recent statements coming in now to lead Disney again prove the fact that the antidote to woke America is America.
So
the incoming chairman of Disney has said that he wants to lower the temperature.
But he wants to lower the temperature in part because the retribution was taking place.
Yeah, I'd also like him to lower the prices at Disney World. But I think it gives evidence of the fact the market is responding. You know what's happened with their stock prices.
And you think that's a political
impact at the box office? No, I just think people are voting with their pocketbooks and they're voting with their feet, which is how America works. And but to me, the problem with ESG has been, there's been, in effect,
Right.
A pernicious agenda that's been being advanced, shareholders unaware of it, and I think because of the efforts that have been happening in states around the country, more and more Americans are attuned to it, and frankly, I already see the market beginning to respond.
It appears that you made some comments this morning, I think, about Twitter and Elon Musk and your support for what he's trying to do to that platform. I would ask you, though, when you think about that, how you think about that also in the context of hate speech, anti-Semitism, all of those other things that may very well land on that platform as a result of this.
Well, thank you for following my earlier interviews, Andrew. I'm impressed.
I follow it all.
Look, as I said in that very same interview, freedom of speech does not extend to crying fire in a crowded theater. There are minimal standards, and including the content standards that you allude to, that I would expect and anticipate that Twitter will continue to aspire to. But look, we've gone through a season where I can tell you as a conservative, I've been deeply troubled about outright censorship against conservative thought on many social media platforms. And I heartily welcome Elon Musk and his decision to release information on the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story. You know, it really was a disgrace to me that a story that came out in the New York Post in this city a month before the election was literally suppressed by social media platforms. People were not allowed to have access to the story. And it would be a year and a half later that the New York Times acknowledged that, in fact, it was Hunter Biden's laptop. The emails were legitimate and verified. I think the American people have a right to know. And a free and open press and the freedom of speech demands that these social media platforms are a level playing field. And so I welcome his efforts. I welcome him pulling out his checkbook for $44 billion and buying Twitter. And my hope is that he'll create it. He'll create a level playing field and an open public marketplace of ideas that respects the values of every American, left, right, and center.
Mr. Vice President, we're going to have to run, but I want to just finally ask you, the GOP has long had a very close relationship with business, but it appears to be shifting. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The relationship between the GOP and big business, or business broadly, do you see a shift in that? Do you see a fissure long term?
Well, look, I grew up in a small family business in a small town in Indiana. You can read about it in my book. It's entitled So Help Me God. And I think the Republican Party is deeply committed to the agenda of free market economics, supporting free enterprise, seeing government as the backstop, not the lead horse in an economy, practicing a limited federal government that allows a vibrant private sector and American innovation. And I fully expect that as we have these important debates, whether it be ESG or otherwise, that you're going to continue to see the Republican Party be the party of not so much businesses large or small, but the party of the American dream and fighting for every American to live a boundless future. And
Mr. Vice President.
That'll be my goal as well.
So help me God. Thank you. Appreciate it very, very much.